Story 1. I met Eddie Murphy at Disney World after the release of Mulan, when he left his sunglasses on the table at the Aztec Temple restaurant. I saw them there while everyone was watching his group leave, grabbed them and yelled, "Hey Eddie, are these yours?" He laughed, said yes, thanked me, and then took a picture with me. Story 2. I worked with many well-known celebrities, but the most famous would be Margot Robbie and Samuel L. Jackson. Both are incredibly humble, personable, and authentic. Story 3. Robin Williams. I was fortunate to be an extra on the basketball team in Flubber, and he was as kind and funny as everyone has said. Truly, it is a great loss. Story 4. I have met some well-known people in my life because I used to be an actor. The absolute coolest had to be Tim Curry, as he introduced himself to me. He wanted to offer some advice and let me ask him questions. He happened to be in the same restaurant where my mentor's husband, and I were eating, and he overheard part of our conversation, which is why he introduced himself. Story 5. One time back in the late 1980s, a friend of mine and I drove to a Miles Davis concert in San Francisco. We were running late, parked the car, and ran to the venue. When we got out, we had no idea where we had parked, as we hadn't bothered to look at a street sign or notice any landmarks. We wandered around for about 15 minutes and then decided to go back to the concert hall and try again. We were close when my friend shouted, "Carlos Santana," and bolted across the street. I chased after him, and there indeed was Carlos Santana with a few of his friends. We were huge fans, had a ton of his records, and had seen him perform several times. Carlos was friendly and appreciative of our enthusiasm. He had been at the concert too, as he had done a few records with Miles, and when we parted ways, he shouted, "Pray for Miles," since it was known that he wasn't in great health, and that ended up being one of his last concerts. We didn't have a camera and weren't into autographs, so it was just something we experienced. And we did pray for Miles. We walked away and immediately found the car. To this day, whenever I forget where I parked, I shout out, "Help me, Carlos Santana." Story 6. I saw Philip Seymour Hoffman, Maria from Sesame Street, and someone from Law and Order, all within a 3-block radius one day in New York City. Story 7. Maya Angelou did a photo shoot at her house. I have met other celebrities, but I'm not sure anyone could come close to her. Story 8. I had an interaction with Prince William at a St. Andrew's pub in 2002. He was quite drunk, and there was a woman in bright pink pants that he was with all night. In retrospect, it was definitely Kate Middleton. Story 9. Robin Williams. I used to work at an LGBTQ-owned and operated comedy club and vegetarian restaurant in San Francisco. One afternoon, I answered our reservation line and someone with a silly voice asked me to please hold for Mr. Williams' secretary. I was then rapidly transferred through half a dozen different people, each with a sillier accent than the one before. After about 5 hilarious minutes, Mr. Williams himself came on the line and reserved 6 tickets for Lip Sync's performance that evening. I essentially got a 5-minute private performance by one of the greatest comedians ever. Story 10. Princess Lady Diana. I was hanging upside down from a tree at an entranceway that she and King Charles were approaching. I fell and broke a rib. She walked over, asked if I was okay, and I fell again, but this time it was in love. Story 11. It is difficult to say. Bob Weir is my dad's best friend, and growing up, I knew him pretty well. I also met many other musicians because of that. I have met Jane Goodall a few times and now work in a field where I encounter her semi-regularly. I have met various actors, but the one people probably know best is Carl Weathers. He is a very nice person. I have met Harry Shearer, known for The Simpsons and This Is Spinal Tap, a few times. I have had many more encounters along those lines, but many of the people I met at the time were not familiar to me, and I do not remember who they were. Story 12. Paul McCartney. After the pub, I happened to be walking past the hotel where he was staying while on tour. I shook his hand. It was surreal. Story 13. When I was 8, I went to a casino with my grandma. I was terrified, and they smelled like plastic. I did not know who they were. Story 14. Alan Rickman. I have never met any other famous person, but I have a photo with him because he randomly came into my workplace once. Story 15. Mandy Moore. My brother won a radio contest when he was 11 and I was 10. She came and picked us up from school in a limousine. Then we got to shop with her and have dinner with her and her mom. She is very kind. Story 16. Not very famous, but musician Jack Johnson checked his identification for a wine purchase around 2004. He is a cool guy. Story 17. In 2014, I saw Bill Cosby from afar at LaGuardia Airport. He was by himself at the gate next to mine, so I decided to say hello. We chatted for a bit, and I took a few pictures. He was very kind. I grew up watching Fat Albert, The Cosby Show, and Ghost Dad, so I felt excited about the encounter. I texted my boyfriend about it as I was boarding and turned off my phone for the 3.5-hour flight. When my boyfriend picked me up from the airport, he shared the news report about Bill Cosby's latest sexual assault allegations. I went from feeling happy to feeling gross. Everybody at work the next day made jokes about it. The timing was pretty ironic. The man was fleeing New York City, and I had no idea. I should mention that my boyfriend and I worked in the same department at the time. When I told him, he was still at work and shared the news with some coworkers. Word obviously spread quickly once the news broke. Story 18. The band Toto. I didn't know who they were while waiting for them, but my shift manager did. They were nice people. Story 19. Bill Burr was at a bar after his show in Hampton Beach, New Hampshire. This was in 2010, so he hadn't really become famous yet, but he was humble and treated those around him very well. Story 20. In the 1980s, I worked as an usherette at a live entertainment venue that had change room facilities backstage, bringing staff and talent into close quarters. One time, I was running to the staff change room, rounded a corner, and accidentally bumped into Shirley MacLaine, knocking her down. She was touring with her one-woman show. I was mortified and terrified, but she was completely lovely. Story 21. I almost bumped into the Dalai Lama. He looked me straight in the eyes, smiled, blessed me, and then walked past. I also met Neil deGrasse Tyson at a rave I organized with friends. He hung around with us for the whole night and was a lot of fun. I fell down the stairs once in a club in front of Ryuichi Sakamoto. He just watched. I had to deal with Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. He was not very pleasant. I chatted on the phone with Skrillex for a radio interview. I forgot to tell him we were already live, but he took it like a champ. Story 22. Joey Ramone. In the early 1980s, a friend and I ran into Joey Ramone at an arcade. We talked for a while and ended up taking him and his tour manager in my friend's Volkswagen Bug to a bar that had a good band playing. Joey made sure we were going to the concert the next night. He wanted to meet us after the concert and go out to an arcade. We went to a different arcade, and the three of us were the only people there. It was a blast. Joey then wanted to get some pizza, so we took him to a friend's apartment 2 blocks away. When we walked in, they were surprised, to say the least. He sat around and talked for over another hour. He then invited my friend and me to their Chicago show later in the week. That's another story. Story 23. A meteorologist named Eric Warren, a few years after speaking to my Cub Scout troop, was caught burning down his own house for insurance money. Story 24. Michael Jackson was at Aventura Mall in Miami when they closed the store. I was inside with my girlfriend at the time, and there were about 8 of us trapped inside due to the crowd trying to get in. He bought us anything we wanted. It was quite an experience. Story 25. My top 2 were Kurt Vonnegut and Nile Rodgers. I worked for an entertainment attorney, and they were his clients. Story 26. More a group, that being the original AC/DC lineup. I was an honorary roadie for the day when they played a lunchtime gig in our school sports hall at the secondary level. I chaperoned them all day, and every band member, including Bon Scott, was just the nicest person yet to become the legends they would be. 15 years old, they treated me so well, and it was all fun. This was in 1974 or 1975. Story 27. I had a pleasant conversation at the airport with Terry Bradshaw. He appeared happy to discuss topics other than football. Both our flights were significantly delayed due to malfunctioning airplanes. Story 28. In 1978, I was flying by myself with my 5-month-old baby. I asked the flight attendant if I could sit somewhere private as I was nursing her. The back 2 rows were vacant, and she seated me there. It was hot, and we had been sitting without air conditioning for about 45 minutes. My baby started fussing and crying, so I began to nurse her. Suddenly, 5 men came back and sat all around me. They cooed and said how cute she was and how they missed their families. My baby pulled off and smiled, giggling. So the 5 men saw my right breast. Story 29. Lady Gaga, super nice. Rami Malek, standoffish. His publicist was difficult while trying to break up a conversation at an event. Method Man, great guy. Black Rob, entitled. Carol G, sweetheart. Drew Barrymore, lovely. Ted Cruz. Okay. Sort of weird, but his wife instructed that no one was to talk to her. Bernie Sanders, no nonsense, but nice and stern. Mariah Carey, eccentric. Calvin Harris, regular guy. Diplo, cool, but a bit uncomfortable around younger women. Dan Aykroyd, at a nightclub promoting his vodka, asked the host to bring women with noticeable physical attributes. Wyclef, chill. Beyoncé, halitosis rumors are true. Story 30. Keanu Reeves sat next to me on a long flight. He asked what I was listening to, then took my phone and made fun of my music. We talked about our favorite books for the rest of the flight. He is a nice man. Clancy Brown was on another flight, and I followed him to the tram. I told him that my daughter and I were huge fans. He said something like to tell her hi, and I replied, "You tell her." He took my phone, said, "Hi, Molly. This is Clancy." And I could hear her expressing her excitement. He was so cool. Story 31. Joe Biden visited my family business while he was president. Dozens of people were there for the press, referring to him as Mr. President. My Midwestern dad shook his hand and said, "Hey, Joe," without a second thought. He didn't seem to mind at all. Story 32. Definitely not a good famous person, but BTK. Before he was caught, he was living under the guise of a normal person. Story 33. I did 2 shows with Chef Andrew Zimmern on Bizarre Foods, once while he was in Toronto and once in Newfoundland. He is such a kind and lovely man. Story 34. I attended the iconic lip sync battle featuring Tom and Zendaya. I also went to the rap party where I met Chrissy, John, and LL Cool J. It has been the best experience I've had in Los Angeles. Story 35. I have met several famous people, but my 3 favorites are Dustin Hoffman, Nicolas Cage, and Kurt Russell. Dustin Hoffman gave me a sandwich. Nicolas Cage set off my car alarm. Kurt Russell was just a really nice guy. I could have taken a photo with him, Goldie Hawn, Kate Hudson, and Chris Robinson, but I only asked him because I made a mistake. I also took shots with Adam Devine, who was great as well. Story 36. Probably Corey Haim. My friends and I got drunk with him back in the day when he was visiting Toronto. He was a super nice guy. He wasn't overly crazy, but we hung out at a bar with him for a few hours and enjoyed a few pints. Story 37. Back in the 1990s, when I was in high school, I was walking home on a random weekday after stopping by my mom's bookstore to tell her I was going to my friend's house later in the afternoon. I ran into a man walking in the opposite direction who looked exactly like Ministry's frontman, Al Jorgensen. Since this was a small town, I thought to myself, wow, that guy must love Ministry. In an attempt to be funny, I told him that Ministry rocked as we walked past each other. He smiled and said, "Right on," or something to that effect. Many years later, when I was in my late 20s, I was home for the holidays and went out for a few beers with old friends who were still living there and involved in the regional music scene. For some reason, the story about how I saw the Al Jorgensen doppelganger came up. I found out from them that it was actually Al Jorgensen himself, who was in town on a break from recording the new Ministry album and visiting members of a local band that never made it big, but whom he had befriended when they played at a festival a few years prior. They even showed me a Les Paul guitar he had gifted to the guitar player during that visit. Story 38. RJ Mitt, who played Walter Jr. in Breaking Bad. lives in my hometown. He is a great person and helped me move furniture once. Story 39. I used to work at an upscale rooftop club in Los Angeles, so I served a lot of famous people. Madonna, Sam Smith, Amy Schumer, Rupert Grint, and Samuel L. Jackson. I know there were more. I also waited on many extremely wealthy individuals whom you may not have heard of. David Rothschild once got very drunk at our bar and told me I should be a professional gigolo. The one person I will always remember, though, is Alison Brie, known for her roles in Mad Men, Community, and Glow. Most celebrities just want to be left alone, but she treated me as an equal, and by the end of the day we were laughing and joking in funny accents like old friends. Judge people by how they treat service employees. That woman is a class act, and you should see everything she is in. Story 40. George Takei. I got to shake his hand. He was genuinely kind and gracious when he said hello. Story 41. I got on a trolley in Nashville, Tennessee with my family about 40 years ago when I was very young, and Roy Acuff and Minnie Pearl were there as well. They were so kind to my family and me. Story 42. William Shatner sat beside him on an airplane. He spoke first and made it clear. No talking, not breathing in his direction, no pictures, and no looking at him. Complete jerk. Story 43. I have met many celebrities while working in popular restaurants, so it's tough to narrow down the most famous. Old school. Ron Howard was really nice and funny. I almost had to help Bryce Dallas Howard give birth one day, which was unusual. Kevin Bacon and Kyra Sedgwick were also memorable. He was pretty funny, and they were very discreet. New school. I used to serve Ryan Reynolds and Alanis Morissette, mainly him and his mother, almost weekly. He is a great tipper, very personable, and absolutely gorgeous in person. Chris Pine was part of the entire cast of Star Trek. I feel bad saying this, but I found Chris Pine not attractive in person, which I recently learned is something he is sensitive about. My husband didn't believe me until we walked right by him at a Starbucks, and it took him multiple looks to confirm it was really him. Now, for the two worst celebrities I have ever met, David Suzuki came across as rude and pretentious. Even the patrons waiting an extra hour for him to arrive expressed their frustrations before he showed up, and he made my mother cry. Laverne Cox wouldn't even make eye contact. When I was taking her and her entourage's order, she whispered her request to the person next to her, who then spoke for her. Overall, she seemed rude yet eager for attention. One guest attempted to say hello but was blocked by security, while Laverne scowled at anyone who dared to look at her. For the record, I have no issue with people wanting to eat in peace. It was her scowling that was off-putting. Additionally, I can't believe I forgot to mention Donald Trump and his entire family. This encounter was before his presidency when I worked at the party for the opening of his hotel in my city. He was quite unpleasant to observe. I assumed that behavior was typical for him. His sons seemed rather foolish, but Ivanka was very pleasant. The champagne I was serving was worth triple what I was being paid for the day per bottle, so I took a swag bag and now shamefully own some Trump champagne glasses. Story 44. I met Tom Hanks and Madonna while they were filming A League of Their Own. I was 9 years old. I remember both of them being very nice, but Tom was especially generous with his time. I was with my summer camp class and we were coming back from the pool. They were filming on the street we had to walk down, so we paused there for a few minutes while they filmed a scene. Afterwards, Tom came over to us and asked all sorts of questions, explaining what they were doing and being genuinely kind to a group of kids. It was great. Story 45. I met numerous famous authors and celebrities while serving as the sales director at major book publishing houses. My favorite moment was watching Anthony Bourdain entertain a notoriously stoic group of Barnes and Noble executives in the private room at Gramercy Tavern, as he personally consumed 3 bottles of wine and 2 martinis. It was transcendent. Story 46. Robin Williams at a USO show in Qatar. I just wanted to thank everyone who performs for the troops, but Robin truly brought the energy. Story 47. I shook Muhammad Ali's hand when I was 16, working at a movie theater he was visiting with his wife. He then backed up and pretended to shadowbox with me. It was the coolest experience ever. His wife was not amused by the interruption. You could see it all over her expression. I understand, though, fans and interruptions probably become annoying quickly. Story 48. I spent a long red-eye flight in first class with Sam Elliott. We watched 13 Warriors on my iPad and talked about blue healers. Nice guy. Story 49. Barack Obama and Jimmy Carter. I live in a place that every candidate visits and met Obama incidentally at an ice cream social in the summer of 2007 right outside my apartment. I met Jimmy Carter at a history teacher conference about a decade ago. I have also encountered most of the candidates from 2016 to 2024. The one I found most personally appealing was probably Cory Booker. Story 50. Met Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, and Jimmy Carter, most of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo astronauts, and was friends with Harrison Ford. Story 51. Story time. I am a wheelchair user. A few years ago, I attended a Weird Al Yankovic concert. The easiest wheelchair access was a hallway from backstage, so they took us through that way. There was a group of men chatting in the hall, and one of them said hello as we passed. Later, I realized it was AL's guitarist, Jim West. Story 52. Jesse Eisenberg was a regular at the co-op where I worked for 5 years. He is a nice guy, as anxious and quiet as you might expect. He often got swarmed by college students since it's a college town in Indiana. One Wednesday, he came in on our $3 dinner night to grocery shop with his son. After finally escaping the crowd of students and reaching the register with my coworker and me, we suggested he might want to avoid Wednesday nights in the future. He agreed. Story 53. As an adult, my top choices are Penn and Gillette. As a teenager, I met Harry Belafonte and Robert Guillaume before their roles in Soap and Benson, because my mother worked at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. Story 54. Obama drove one of the vans in his motorcade when he visited San Francisco during his presidency. The staff were quite arrogant, crossing the city without any stops, driving on the freeway with no cars, and watching Air Force One land. Then seeing him come out was honestly one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I shook his hand. It was very soft. I also have a picture that I get to show people. I also worked for Bloomberg in New York City, but it was not as exciting. Story 55. Kevin Hart, Evan Peters, Jenna Von Oy, and my favorite, Henry Winkler. Kevin Hart was funny. He was renting a car from the Atlanta airport and treated everyone very well. He had a large group with him, mostly women. He was famous but hadn't really blown up yet, so he hung out for a bit. A coworker asked for a photo, and Kevin took his phone, gathering his female friends around the coworker to take the picture. I met Evan Peters in an airport as well. It was a brief, unremarkable encounter. I worked there at the time and made him a salad. I could tell he just wanted to be left alone, so I didn't make a big deal out of it. There was an obnoxious girl who followed him in and tried to take photos of him while he ate. I felt bad for him, so we asked her to leave. Please don't be that girl. It's cringeworthy. Jenna Von Oy, who is that, you ask? Nobody important. She was on Blossom back in the day. I met her in an elevator in Miami. I was working there on business. She was super rude, acting as if she was offended to be in the elevator with me. I found it amusing. I knew I had seen her face before, but didn't even remember her name. And Henry Winkler. Best experience, albeit brief, also in an airport. He was wearing a bright pink sweater, and I saw him from a distance. I usually don't bother people, even famous ones, but it was Henry Winkler. I introduced myself and asked for a photo. He was genuinely the sweetest about it. Story 56. President Biden, Morgan Freeman, Tom Hanks, Venus, and Serena Williams. All in the context of my job as a freelance lighting designer and technician. Story 57. Dionne Warwick behaved poorly on an airline flight. Larry Gatlin was a delightful roommate on a flight. Story 58. Jeff Goldblum was in a Luxor elevator in 2001. I tried to act like I didn't know him, but he wasn't having any of that. Story 59. Natalie Portman. Our grandparents used to live in the same condominium in Cincinnati. She walked up next to me by the valet when I was about 14 or 15, right after Star Wars was released, and I nearly fainted. It was Christmas Eve, and she asked how the wait was while my dad's car was being pulled up. I replied, "About as quick as that." I wished her a Merry Christmas, and she wished it back. I will never forget the natural beauty of that woman. Story 60. I met Meryl Streep when I was a child, and she was such a dream. Seriously, she is one of the nicest people ever. Story 61. The Ramones performed on Thursday, April 3rd, 1980, at the Armadillo World headquarters. It was my first concert, and I met them after their soundcheck. Story 62. I had the opportunity to shake hands and take a picture with Chuck Norris in Iraq during the United Service Organizations tour. This was at the height of the Chuck Norris joke era, making it a memorable experience. Story 63. Troy Donahue tried to kidnap me when I was 13. I looked 16, but I told him my age. He wanted to take me to a party, and I refused. When I threatened to jump out of the car, he finally let me go. I always thought he was gay, but I guess I was mistaken. Story 64. A family connection got me into the Clinton White House in the 1990s. I was in his office during a photo opportunity with several other people and exchanged a glance with him but did not actually meet him. I passed Katie Holmes jogging a couple of times, and she smiled and said hello once. I saw Lindsay Wagner in a bookstore, and she smiled and said hello. I was leaving a mall with a friend in the mid-1990s and passed by Gregory Hines walking with a young woman toward the building. As we were driving by, my friend and I both recognized him but took a moment to remember his name. I said Gregory Hines excitedly, and my friend leaned out the window and yelled his name. I looked in the rearview mirror as Hines turned around, flashed a big smile, and waved at us. Story 65. I took the worst selfie ever with Justin Trudeau back in 2015. He looks great and I look demented. I've also met Trixie Mattel and Lemon, but those were paid meet and greets. Trixie loved my dress, which was pink and navy in a very 1960s pattern. Definitely the perfect dress to meet her in. Lemon told me my other pink dress reminded her of Betsy Johnson, and when I mentioned that Betsy and Iris Apfel were my fashion heroes, she told me she had met Iris. This was just a few months after Iris passed away last year. Story 66. Kurt Cobain said hello backstage at the Aragon in Chicago in 1993. It was a disappointing Nirvana show, to be honest. I got high with Blind Melon in early 1993. Eddie Vedder gave me a banana from his catering at a Pearl Jam show in 1992. I talked about drum and bass with David Byrne, who was a huge Jungle fan, in 1997. I met Elvis Costello and Burt Bacharach in a Chicago hotel bar. They were in town for a show at the Chicago Theater on State. I vandalized a cheesy radio station hearse with Green Day in 1994. I had spray paint in my car as I was getting into spray can art at the time. When they said they wished they had some spray paint after seeing the hearse, I rose to the occasion. Story 67. My cousin is in a show that is set to be released on Netflix in just over a week. He will also be starring in a film with Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi soon. I am proud of him. Story 68. I was a cameraman for a comedian-based interview show called Comedian on Comedian. I got to meet the entire cast of Reno 911 in costume. They stayed in character only for the interview. Afterwards, they were very nice and generous with their time. I will never forget it. Story 69. Barack Obama, in 2001, was smoking a cigarette in front of my wife's office. He was there to see the Democratic Precinct Committeeman, whose office was on the second floor. In 1997, Jackie Joyner Kersee delivered and set up a jukebox at her home. In 1975, Leonard Nimoy was on a speaking tour and visited Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Story 70. When I was 3, almost 4, my mom took me to see Dolly Parton. We stopped at a florist to get roses and a Care Bear balloon. I got to go up the stairs to the stage to give them to her. I still have the calendar we bought at the concert. Story 71. I have met Chris Martin from Coldplay, former Mexican President Vicente Fox, Justin Timberlake, Ricky Martin, and Kiefer Sutherland. I saw Matt Damon in Berlin, and he looked in my general direction. I was a loose acquaintance of Tom Green just before he had his 15 minutes of fame. Story 72. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Maria Shriver were friends before his political career and while they were still married. My mom and Maria have been friends since college. Story 73. Robin Williams. I sold him sunscreen. All my coworkers were watching me from the end of the aisle while I was showing him where it was on the shelves. I went and rang him up, and he went on his way. He was nice. My coworkers all asked how I kept my cool. I did not recognize him at all. I have met Tegan and Sarah twice, kind of 3 times, but 2 of the 3 were on the same day. I went and saw their show and had them sign a copy of their CD. They were playing in the basement of a local bar. The cover was about $2 or $5 to get in. After the show, my friends and I went to the gay bar just up the road from where they were playing. My friends and I grabbed a table by the door, a couple of pitchers of beer, and a few glasses. Tegan and Sarah came in, and my very flamboyant gay male friend shouted, "Hey, come sit with us. We have extra glasses." They did, and the small group of us hung out for the evening. It was a fun evening. The second or third time I met them was when they were playing a show at a local church. That time, I got them to sign my black guitar with a silver marker. I didn't hang out with them that evening, but it was fun because I was with one of my friends from the first time, and they remembered us enough to recognize our faces, but not our names, which was cool. Story 74. Kirk and Michael Douglas were at La Costa Resort in California around 1973. I watched Kirk playing tennis when he hit a ball into the seats. I was the only one watching, so I grabbed the ball and handed it to him. Later that evening, he, Michael, and their family were at dinner. My mom shared a hot tub with Lucille Ball that same weekend. I remember her laughing as she talked about all the fake breasts floating around. Story 75. When I was a child in the late 1980s, I had the opportunity to meet and watch a Detroit Red Wings game with Gordy and Colleen Howe. Story 76. I was with friends at a convention center, tagging along when I realized that Sarah Palin was going to speak after her national debate. We were on one side toward the back when a large wall magically moved and opened. Her SUV drove through, and she got out with her group. Then she walked straight up to my friends and me, who were by the aisle, and shook our hands. It was such an unexpected moment. Story 77. Michael Mando was at a Lebanese restaurant in Westwood. I was eating while he was in line for takeout. I thought I recognized him, but I only confirmed it by hearing his voice. I had to say hello, and he was as gracious and kind as expected. He is an awesome person, and the hummus was excellent. Story 78. I met Robin Williams and Lance Armstrong after a USO show in Iraq. I met Conan O'Brien in Santa Monica. I met Jeremy Clarkson at London Heathrow Airport. Story 79. Hugh Hefner in Miami at a luxury hotel I couldn't afford at the time. Larry Hankin in Venice, California. A very nice guy. I recognized his voice first. George Clinton, I smoked a joint with him. He performed for about 10 minutes, and once he left the stage, we decided to leave too. While walking down the street, I saw him behind the venue wearing a long black coat. I approached him and offered him a joint we had. It was a cool experience. Napoleon Murphy Brock kissed me on the cheek. I also met the drummer and guitarist of Yeah Yeah Yeahs. Johnny Galecki from Roseanne was another encounter. Randy Houser, I smoked herb with him on his tour bus. I had no idea who he was until he went on stage. Lou Ferrigno at a comic convention, I told him I loved him in Pumping Iron. Bhagwan Das and Ram Das. Needless to say, I have met my share and hope to meet more. Story 80. Bill Clinton, when he was president, visited our nonprofit organization while I was 16 and working as a peer counselor. I had to tell him about our department, and he was twirling a piece of my hair the entire time I spoke. Story 81. Jay Muse at a comic convention hit on me, and we sold him some of the cannabis we had grown that season, even though he is sober. That was an awesome day. I also walked behind Bill Hader when we both parked in the same alley in Venice. I was excited and trying to contain myself, and my friend whispered, "Be cool," to me. I didn't say anything to him, but when he turned the corner, he had a big smile on his face, and I like to think it was because of me. Story 82. I don't think I've met anyone super famous. I met someone from the Seahawks once at an event. I got to meet the voice of Bowser and Brandon Routh at a convention. Routh was awesome. The story I like to share is when my dad introduced me to a country singer. I went into the city of Houston with my dad for some reason I can't remember, probably a doctor's appointment. Anyway, we stopped by a friend's house briefly, and he ran inside, leaving me in the truck with the air conditioning on. He came back out with a man and said, "I'd like you to meet Clint Black." He reached out and shook my hand. He had been on the Country Music Awards a couple of days before, so all I could say was, "Didn't I just see you on TV?" He laughed and then went on his way before my dad and I left. Story 83. I met Osama bin Laden at a Make-A-Wish Foundation charity event in Dubai in 2000. He shook my hand and autographed my Bible. He was very nice. I had heard rumors that he could be rather arrogant in person, but he did not seem that way to me. Story 84. Probably Harrison Ford or Bill Gates. Bill was at a gas station restroom with his bodyguard waiting outside. Harrison Ford ordered the same sandwich I did. Both encounters were brief, just a smile and a nod. My favorite encounter was with Danny Trejo. We were waiting in line at Venice Beach years ago. He was very nice and funny. Others I have met include Michelle Rodriguez, Condoleezza Rice, Miranda Kerr, Steve Jobs, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, among a few others. Story 85. I wouldn't say I met her, but I was walking past Paris Hilton in Las Vegas and I said, "Hey, Paris." Then she gave me a hug. However, I recall being quite drunk that night, so I'm not entirely sure it was her. Story 86. Elijah Wood was at a bar during South by Southwest in 2004 or 2005. My brother told him he was awesome in Radio Flyer. Story 87. I met Jeff Bezos at a formal black tie dinner. I was the master of ceremonies, and he was receiving an award for his achievements. After he gave his acceptance speech, he accidentally left the award on the podium. I humorously told the crowd that I would sell it on Amazon later that night. Story 88. I had the opportunity to meet Donald Trump in person once. I was a member of the fire department, and we were on standby when he came to our small town. He entered the empty room where I was taking a break. "Hello. Hey, how are you?" That was all we said before a Secret Service agent escorted me out. Story 89. I was working at a restaurant when I had a conversation with a guy at a table about a band because one of their pictures was hung up in the restaurant. We ended up talking about our love for rock and punk music for about 10 minutes. When I left to help another table, my coworker ran up to me and asked if I knew who I had been talking to. It was none other than Michael McDonald. Story 90. I worked in a ski rental shop at a popular ski resort in Canada. Over the years, I met Andy Serkis, Neil McDonough, Chad Kroeger, and Rob Lowe. There were a few others, but those were the standout individuals. Additionally, the Commodore from Pirates of the Caribbean was a regular visitor during the summer when we rented mountain bikes. He would leave his son with us for a couple of hours while he rode the downhill bike park. Story 91. I met Jimmy Fallon and Jason Sudeikis because I used to have a dog who was a model and actor, and I was her handler. Story 92. I met Brad Pitt in the late 1990s. It was just as he was starting to gain fame. He seemed bored and somewhat above attending the event, which was understandable, though it might have been too early for him to feel that way. Story 93. I've met Mila Kunis and Macaulay Culkin. I've bumped into Andy Dick before I realized who he was. I had a fantastic interaction with Michael Lerner at a Starbucks in Los Angeles in 1999. I hung out at a Starbucks when Danny DeVito arrived with his then-wife to pick up their order. I'm sure there were others, but these were the most memorable ones. Story 94. Katy Perry and Hayden Christensen were both wonderful and nice. I was lucky to win a meet and greet with Katy during her Witness tour, and I met Hayden at a convention last year. Story 95. Bill Murray. They were filming Mad Dog and Glory right near my place. I was walking by, stopped to watch for a moment, and suddenly, there's Bill Murray in a car, waiting to film, I guess. He pointed and waved me over. I thought, me. Security let me through, and he started chatting with me about my tattoos. This was before everyone had them. He even asked, "Do you have any more I should know about?" I made a witty reply, then he had to go shoot. We said goodbye, and I still can't believe it happened. I have always loved him. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.